I was lucky enough to be introduced into the ecosystem through the MLH Fellowship. I also have a very, very supportive technical manager. And the OpenStack Ironic team is also, some of the best communities you can be a part of because you can always throw out questions when you have confusion, regardless of, what the question is, and someone will always
Hi, I'm Tabitha DiDomenico, and this is an episode of the G Research Open Source Software Outreach Podcast, also known as the GR-OSS OUT Podcast. Today, my guest is CID. He's a member of the GR-OSS team here at G Research. CID, how do we know you? What kind of work do you do? What projects are you on? Give us a little bit of background about you, please.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I am Afonne CID Paul Onyedikachi, but everyone calls me CID. I'm a software engineer focused on the open source infrastructure. Day to day, I'm a maintainer and a contributor on the OpenStack Ironic and its adjacent repositories. Basically, my work is to help run a project that lets people manage physical servers just like you would a cloud server.
So, give a little more background about OpenStack and more specifically Ironic. Not everybody is as deeply entrenched in this world as you and Jay are. So, for maybe explain the problem space that Ironic was created to solve, or some of the things that it can solve now for folks.
So, ironic with generally there is a cloud which everybody is familiar with, and a lot of people do not have to worry about under the hood what happens because at the end of the day, a cloud is also a physical server, but it's just abstracted away in such a way that you do not have to worry about all of that. And OpenStack Ironic is that service within the OpenStack ecosystem. So OpenStack is a suite of services that, when deployed together, gives you access to a cloud. So, and Ironic is that service that it uses to provision bare metal machines. And bare metal machines are physical servers without an operating system. That's basically what they are. And so Ironic comes into the picture. It handles the entire server lifecycle. So from the enrollment, that's recognizing the servers that it's going to be responsible for, the nodes that it's going to be responsible for, enrollment, cleaning, provisioning, and deployment. So the entire life cycle, Ironic does that, including the firmware updates and every other thing that goes into getting a node from just the bare metal node to an available node ready to be used in the wild. That's what Ironic does. And I manage and maintain the nitty gritties, like the under the hood, the code that Ironic leverages to make that happen. Um, so OpenStack Ironic basically just makes it possible and easy to provision physical servers, as easy as it is for managing cloud.
Is there any part of this project that you're working on right now that you're particularly excited about? Is there a new feature coming out or any work that you've done recently that really got you, you're like, ah, this finally landed. I'm delighted that it landed.
There's always something exciting in OpenStack generally, but also my area of focus, which is OpenStack Ironic. Um, this cycle, though, there has been a particular focus on security and security-related fixes. So a lot of the things that I would call exciting, which also happen to be the first time that I'm able to do them, are things like writing advisories, the advisory for a new vulnerability that's getting patched, and things like that. So this cycle has mostly been focused on security fixes and releasing advisories and notes, depending on the severity of a particular vulnerability. Um, but I've worked on pretty uh, meaty features in Ironic that I'm proud of, not necessarily recently. One of those is the Runbook feature. Runbook is a feature that bundles together automation and security guarantees. So basically, there's what we call cleaning and servicing in Ironic. And what that means is you run steps against Ironic to take action on a node. Those steps might be to perform firmware updates, might be to clean up the storage, it might be to configure to run inspection on the node, then take inventory of the specifications detected and a whole lot of that. Before runbooks, the way you do that is you run arbitrary steps. So just a collection of JSON via the CLI, and it executes on a node. So there was no way to determine that the steps you're running are compatible with the node you're running them against, and also that you have the clearance, for lack of a better word, to execute those steps on those particular nodes. What Runbooks does is it gives you the ability as an operator to predefine these steps beforehand, and also predefine the nodes that they are allowed to be executed against through what we call traits. So the V2 version of Runbooks that's coming out this hibiscus cycle will allow many-to-many relationships. With the V1, the current feature we have, the current mechanics is that you establish a relationship between your runbook and a node via having the name of that runbook to match any trait configured on a node. So that provides a one-to-many relationship. So you can have any number of nodes with at least that runbook name as a trait in them, and that means approval. And the V2, the improvement we are making is ensuring that you can define a set of traits in the runbook as well as you can currently do today on the node, so that you have that many to many. So basically, once you are done defining a runbook, it can be reused as many times as possible. It can be automated, it can be run on any number of nodes as long as they've been approved, and they can be used by any project that already have access to a runbook.
It sounds like that makes things a lot easier to manage everything that you've already provisioned. So, how did you get involved in Ironic and OpenStack to begin with?
So I applied to MLH, the Major League Hacking Fellowship, twice. First in early 2023, and I was rejected. I reapplied that October, and that stuck. And that marked the turning point in my career and gave me my first real taste of open source. And I had come from ALX, the African Leadership Experience, a Pan African program for learning software engineering on demand. So, one thing ALX did, in addition to giving me a platform to learn the skill, was connect me across Africa. But MLH connected me to the whole world. And and that's one of the things that I like about open source development, because it gives you uh, your work is out there in the open, and that serves as a track record that I would admit it's anxiety inducing initially, because you know that everything you've done is in the public, but eventually it becomes a flex. It becomes something you can always point anybody to look at, and it also shows your growth through the journey. I think that's one of the best aspects of open source.
That's interesting that you would say that it's a bit anxiety inducing as you start contributing to open source. It's not the first time that I've heard a similar sentiment. What advice would you have for somebody that's new to open source and might be feeling that same anxiety? How did you manage it? What did you do to sort of combat that?
Eventually, you would get used to it and you start enjoying it as one of the aspects that you like about open source. I was lucky enough to be introduced into the ecosystem through the MLH Fellowship. I also have a very, very supportive technical manager. And the OpenStack Ironic team is also, some of the best communities you can be a part of because you can always throw out questions when you have confusion, regardless of, what the question is. And someone will always have something to guide you towards the right direction.
So, which fellowship project or contribution from your time as an MLH fellow still sticks with you? And if you could give us some detail about why.
That would be OpenStack Ironic Bug Dashboard. So it's very straightforward project. It's one of those tools that, as someone that I'm now on a day to day, I'm a maintainer and I contribute, and a lot of that is code reviews, but I'm also triaging newly filed bugs against the project. Ironic Bug Dashboard is that tool that it shows you an overview of every newly filed bugs alongside their criticality, the severity of the bug. So if it's high, it should be fastly attended to. If it's a new bug, then someone like me or any other person in the community can easily review and access the validity and the severity of the bug and triage it as necessary. So Irony Bug Dashboard is one of those tools. It's the center of my contribution during the MLH Fellowship. Almost 80% of all my contributions during MLH Fellowship was improving the Ironic Bug Dashboard. The project stands out because it's not every time that you make a contribution to an open source project that you also get to use on a daily or weekly basis.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite rewarding to interact with your own work, something that was sort of your first real big push in this space. And now it's a tool that you actually rely on. I just think there's something really spectacular about that, honestly, to be able to create and use your own tools and then share it so everybody else can use it. That's sort of the nature of open source, anyways. So before your work on the bug dashboard, there was an existing bug dashboard and you added the improvements to it, or is it not as functioning as it should be, or was it completely greenfield and not anything there and you had to build it from scratch?
So it's not a from scratch build. It was the code already existed. A lot of what I did was make it useful. Like I added features such that any project that utilized Launchpad as their platform for triaging bugs or tracking bugs filed against their project can clone the current Ironic Bug Dashboard code base and just configure their own project configurations, and they will be able to use the same tool that I used for Ironic for their own projects. So one of those features was extensibility, making it useful for every other person that uses Launchpad. Was also the way we track what bugs are which. So when a bug is very old, when a bug is newly filed, how do we filter those and how do we categorize them? Because that helps with attending to urgent ones as fast as possible.
Makes sense. So during your fellowship, what's something about open source work that surprised you, good or bad? Like, is there anything that was like, wow, I didn't realize this is the situation of things?
During the MLH Fellowship, I got into the Ironic community on the IRC channel. So I heard some expressions and certain speak that I was not very familiar with. I started on the part to track cool expressions and just nice things that I heard in the community that I was not very familiar with because they are very shorthand heavy, but there is also for a global contributor, there are just expressions that you're not very used to or familiar with that you just have to learn as you get into the project. And coming into that space for the first time, that was surprising and that stood out. And also code reviews. Everything you do goes through that loop. You pick a bug or you get assigned one, You fix it, you patch it, you push it up, you get reviews, and everything is public. People will disagree with the approaches you've taken and with your proposals, and you have to address them as many times as those feedback comes until it's in a state where everybody agrees that this is the right part before it merges.
That sort of leads me to my next question is how did the fellowship shape the way you collaborate on code now?
One of the good things about MLH was that they were very intentional with the introduction because I believe they know with experience and having conducted this over and over again that a lot of these people that are coming into the fellowship, they are just coders, they are just software engineers, but they do not know about these aspects, these parts, this new perspective. So first thing we did was collaborate on a demo project. So everybody in the pod contributed to that demo project. Someone else offered a review, another person replied to the review or merged it or rejected it.
So, if now has the amount of time that you're spending writing new code versus reviewing code, has that changed significantly from your fellowship days, or has it stayed the same as your responsibility with the project has also changed?
I would say that has remained mostly the same because the first time I was learning how the code worked. So I was learning how to contribute to these projects. I was learning the structure of the different code bases where every module and every file was located. There was a lot of learning as well as doing the contributions. So that worked out with the time and the output. And today, I have a very good understanding of how the project is structured, but the kind of tasks that I take on now are also not the same level of simplicity. So maybe the code volume has changed. Maybe instead of always adding code, I'm making commits now that remove code, delete features. Yeah, so if you average it, it's going to be mostly the same or maybe more now, especially in terms of volume, but not by number of commits.
Sounds like the level of sophistication has changed as far as what you're contributing to now versus maybe when you were first starting out with the project. As time has gone on in this, and you have evolved, I don't think we touched on what drew you to software engineering to begin with. I think it takes somebody that has a certain sort of, just enjoyment of figuring out these puzzles. And I'm wondering if that's, the case for you, or is it something else that drew you to it?
I've always been fascinated by computers generally, right from the onset. And I started out working at cyber cafes and computer centers. So I had to deal a lot with not the programming aspect of things, but I got very technical that I knew how to format the computer. I knew how to install new OSs. I knew desktop publishing, so the basic graphics design, typesetting, the basic things you do at a computer center. And within that, I did a lot of automation things because I like automating tasks every time. And Python was one of those tools that I found early on to automate anything that was mundane or that could leverage algorithms to make it faster. And eventually that grew into something I wanted to turn into a full-time career. And in 2021, I underwent the ALX software engineering program, which lasted for 12 months and the rest is history.
You're talking about automating with Python. I think there's a book that I read a while ago. It's called "Automate the Boring Things with Python." So that totally speaks to me. I get it. What skills have you picked up that you learned that you needed to have now as a full time engineer, coming from your start in 2021, getting in software engineering, to now in working as a full time engineer in open source? What skills have you picked up along the way that you think are sort of critical to do this work?
Before now, it was only about the code, but now I am learning more about the security of the code. So not just the functionality of the code, but also how secure it will be. And I also have dabbled into releasing the first release of the hibiscus cycle. I call that release. So I also am learning how not just to make the contributions, but also get it to the end user. And I've worked on a few security embargoed bugs. So it's mostly security related and quality generally. And the fact that you're not going to know everything, but if you know the right questions to ask and the right person to ask it, you'd always figure almost all of it out. Something Jay used to say is if you try to do something for 30 minutes, if you're not able to do that, maybe it's time to ask someone. So I always have, in terms of the asking questions skill, because I consider that a skill, I always have my LLMs or Google search or the documentation pages for whatever I'm trying to do. And if it takes me more than 20 minutes, I always turn to the community or J. So that's a quality skill. So security, I'm becoming more security aware. I ask more questions and I'm working on delivering the software to the users instead of just doing the contribution.
So learning the release process is and publishing too, that's something I hadn't considered as part of that. What's part of the whole cycle that I think that probably gets overlooked a lot, or that maybe even though that you know about it now, it's still sort of like, most people don't realize that this is part of what makes the software go, right? There's so many pieces to it. And talking about Jay, he's great for this is, sort of keeping the community commons, right? So there's that part of the work that I am certain you are very aware of. Is there any part of this that, folks that aren't in open source and don't know how it's made that, they would be surprised to hear about, do you think?
It's just how much it takes to keep backwards compatibility. It's one thing to want a feature or to backport a change. It's another thing to ensure that it works for every other person that's already using that code. I think that's something that's overlooked, but it's very critical. It's very key to what projects as big as OpenStack Ironic does, keeping everybody happy, both the new users are going to be using the new releases as well as the old users are going to be getting the backports, the security patches, and the rest of them.
I wouldn't have guessed that's what you would have said, but that makes a lot of sense. How far back do you keep support for Ironic?
So we keep support for around 4 stable branches. So currently, the current release cycle is the Hibiscus cycle. That's 2026.2. We have released for 2026.1, which is the last release. We'll have support for 2025.2, 2025.1, and then we have 2 unmaintained branches. 2023.2 and 2023.1, those are 2 unmaintained branches. Those do not get much attention, but we always also backport any major vulnerability fixes. We make sure that they get to the unmaintained branches.
The amount of thought that goes into understanding what you're going to support on a project that's big, particularly as large as Ironic and OpenStack, I don't think most people are aware of either. Uh,
It-
it gets pretty complex, and I appreciate that you shining a little light on that. You talked about applying to the MLH Fellowship, and on your first pass, you were rejected. But then you didn't let that stop you. You came back and you applied again. What advice would you might give to somebody who's looking to apply for the MLH Fellowship, or maybe has received a rejection from MLH or other organizations? How would you encourage them to keep trying again?
The one thing I keep at the back of my mind is, especially as in the advent of AI, code is becoming cheaper and cheaper. It's becoming less about the code and more about the person. So I think you should lean in on your story, who you are, what drives you. That will make you stand out beyond any code. And any portfolio projects that you're going to be submitting for these programs, you should also ensure that you understand what it actually does. This is one of those ones that you might want to sit down and code out yourself so that you understand the choices you're making and why you made them and why you have built anything the certain way it is. But mostly the story, I think, should be at the top of your priority because that will make you stand out. And because anybody can write any particular code and maybe even spend time trying to understand and defend it. but your perspective and what you're going to bring, that's always going to be fresh. So leaning to that entire story.
That's great. And if you could go back and you could tell yourself before you'd gotten into this fellowship, if you could tell yourself one thing, what would it be?
I would say it does not bite. Sometimes you're going to cringe. Um, um, but everybody wants you to succeed. Every single person is rooting for you.
Yeah, that is the case. That is the case. There's nothing like the community in open source, and I just hear amazing things about the team over on Ironic. So you know that you're on the show. It's gross out. You work with Jay, so you know the deal. What's your gross out moment in open source, and how did you work through it?
I mentioned I caught the first release for the OpenStack Ironic project earlier. Turns out that I misunderstood the scope that I was supposed to go in cutting that release. So maybe some people in the open source community are familiar with the fact that a lot of projects are having to deal with a barrage of security fixes. And as we make those fixes, we want to backport them as far back as possible so that we can release those and every downstream can, update their environments to make sure they are always secure. So I released the table branch for the hibiscus cycle for the master a bit too early. So the right scoping was to release just the bug fixes for all the stable branches, but we eventually strengthened that out. I consider that a crash out moment. But given that it's my first release, I had a lot to take from that. And if I hadn't made the mistake, I wouldn't know how to correct it.
I think that's sort of the experience for many folks is, you hit these moments and it ends up being an excellent learning experience for you. So we know OpenStack, we know Ironic. Is there another open source project that you feel like does not get enough love that you would like to give a little shout out to before we wrap things up?
Not anyone specifically, but those projects that do the most work in the community but gets the least attention, especially those ones that are managed by one single contributor or maintainer. I think those need all the help because I cannot imagine what it takes for someone to do, that amount of work, be responsible for, those critical software. And there are a lot of them, you'll be surprised. Those need all the love they can get. I remember we removed support for EventLet. And EventLet is one of those tools that's used directly or indirectly by a lot of softwares and other projects, including OpenStack Ironic. And it will be interesting to find out that there were not a lot of people that were maintainers on the project, which is why when the way Eventlet worked and have been able to work all along, and Python made that unsustainable, and there was not enough hands to readapt the eventless software. OpenStack had to migrate away from eventless. So projects like that, and even other ones that are even more critical, they need all the attention.
Thank you for that. And thank you to G Research for giving us this platform to be able to talk about open source and our experiences working on various projects in this community. If you are in the London area, take a look at the G Research website for events and any openings that we have or job openings that are available. And take a look at the website. Thank you so much. This is Tabitha at the Gross Out Podcast.